Hi, we're glad you're joining us again for our family time video. Last week we talked about Jacob, and at the end of it, I told you that he had 12 sons and a daughter, and we're going to jump right in with that family. Let me tell you a little bit more about them. Jacob's 12 sons and daughters, their sons are named this: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. Hope you memorized that real quick. And then the daughter's name was Dinah. Now, it is possible he had more daughters. That's the only one we know about. But he had lots of kids, and this was a really big family. So now remember, if we go all the way back, Abraham had Isaac, and Isaac had Jacob, and then Jacob had all of these kids. But you see, here was the problem. Jacob had a favorite son. He had one son that he loved more than all the others, and that was the 11th boy, Joseph. And so there's the 10 older ones, and then Joseph, number 11, and then Benjamin comes along at number 12. But Joseph was his favorite, and this is what Jacob did. He got him a coat that was brightly colored. And it was really pretty and ornate is what the Bible says. And so Joseph would wear this coat. It might be a little bit like this picture. I mean, probably without the hat and the cane, but you get the idea. This very bright coat is what he had. And so we're actually going to do our family time activity already right here at the beginning. Here's what I want you to do. To kind of remember this idea of Joseph's coat, I want you to make something very colorful and pretty at your house. It could be something built out of Legos, all different colors. It could be a picture that you draw. You could go on your sidewalk and do sidewalk chalk in different colors. Put something in your window that's colorful. Whatever it is that you want to do something bright and colorful and creative in your house, and take a picture or a video of it and post it on here so that we can all see it and share and how pretty that is. And so try to do something colorful with your family. That is the family time activity. And you can do that whenever we're finished with the rest of our lesson. Well, Joseph had this coat, and the brothers were kind of jealous of him. And then he told them this. Joseph said, I had a dream. He said, and in this dream, there were these sheaves of wheat, which means they're basically just a big piece of wheat, and they were all bowing down to me. And basically what that dream meant was that all of his brothers and his parents were all going to bow down to him, to Joseph. Now, I don't know about you, but that probably wasn't the best idea to tell that to your brothers who probably already didn't like you. And so he told them, oh yeah, you guys are all going to end up bowing down to me. And they're like, what is this guy's problem? Well, Joseph's dad remembered that in mind, and we're going to see a little bit later how that plays out. But I want us to go ahead and stop right here. We're going to have a little bit of discussion time. And here's the questions that I want you to discuss. How do you think Joseph's brothers felt knowing that Joseph was their dad's favorite? Do you think they might have been jealous? Do you think they might have been mad? How do you think they would have felt? What about this question? Why don't you talk about this? How should they have reacted? How should the brothers reacted to Joseph? And then what could Joseph have done different to help the situation? How could he have been different to help this situation? We want you to discuss that as a family, and then we'll be right back. All right, we're back. So Joseph was really disliked by his brothers, and you can imagine why. He had this coat that nobody else had. He's having these dreams that they're all going to bow down to him. And so they really didn't like him. And one day, his brothers were out working, and he was sent by his father to find his brothers. And he couldn't find them where they were supposed to be. And somebody said they're down a ways farther. And so he began to go down there. And his brothers saw him coming from a distance. And this is what they said. They said this. They said, here comes that dreamer. They said to each other, come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. I mean, these guys were so mad. They wanted to kill their brother Joseph. The Bible tells us this. When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. Let's not take his life, he said. Don't shed any blood. Throw him into the cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him. And the Bible says that Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So Reuben's like, just throw him in this well, and then don't do anything to him, and everything will be okay there. He'll just die there. But Reuben was going to come back and actually rescue him. I mean, his brothers hated Joseph. So Joseph gets there, and this is what they decide to do. They take his coat, and they rip it all up, and they put blood on it, and make it look like an animal ate him. And they throw him in the well. Well, right about this time, there's this caravan that comes through. And this caravan was all these people traveling south to trade things, and they came by and they were slave traders. And so the brothers said, we know what we'll do. We'll sell them Joseph. So they sold Joseph to this traveling caravan, and they went all the way down to Egypt. Actually, what it says is this, that they sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. So instead of killing Joseph, he's going to go be a slave in another country. All right, let's stop and do another discussion time. I want you to talk about this. Why did the brothers do what they did? Why did they throw him in a well, and why were they thinking about killing him, and why did they end up selling him into slavery? What would you have done if you were one of Joseph's brothers? Would you have been this cruel to Joseph? What would you have done? And how would you have felt if you were Joseph? How would you have felt if you were the one thrown into a well? Or you were sold to these slave traders not knowing what was going to happen to you? Well, let's stop and discuss those. So now we're back, and this is where Joseph is at. Joseph has been sold into slavery into Potiphar's house. And Potiphar is a pretty high-ranking official in Pharaoh's government. And he does all kinds of stuff for Potiphar. And so he is in charge of Potiphar's whole house because Potiphar is being blessed by Joseph being there. However, something happens. You see, Potiphar's wife was wanting Joseph to do stuff he shouldn't do. And he refused to do it. And she got mad because he kept saying no. And so she falsely accused him of doing something bad that he didn't even do. Well, Potiphar heard about this, and he got angry at Joseph. And he says, you're in charge of my whole house, and yet you act this way because of this lie? And Joseph's like, I didn't do anything. And Potiphar says, I don't believe you. And they threw Joseph into jail. Well, Joseph is in the jail. It is really interesting what the Bible tells us. Is it says Joseph could be trusted so much that the jailer put him over everybody in the jail while he's in jail. Well, he's in there with two guys. One is a cupbearer, and the other is a baker. And they have dreams. And the cupbearer is saying something to Joseph about this dream, and he says, I don't know what it means. And Joseph says, I'll tell you what it means. He told the cupbearer, he says, in 3 days, you're going to be lifted back up into your position and serve Pharaoh. Let me tell you what a cupbearer is. A cupbearer is not really a great job. Your job is simply this. You bring the king or the Pharaoh a drink, and you test it first to make sure nobody poisoned him. That way, if somebody did, you would die instead of the Pharaoh. I don't know that that's a great job that anybody would really want. But he was going to get his job back in 3 days. Well, the baker heard this, and he said, well, I had a dream too. Let me tell you my dream. And Joseph tells him, he goes, well, in 3 days, you're going to have your head cut off, and you're going to be put on a stick. And in 3 days, both of those happened. Both of those things happened. And Joseph told him, he told the cupbearer, he says, remember me whenever you leave here. Well, it was 2 years later that the cupbearer remembered Joseph. He had forgotten about him for 2 years. I don't know about you, but I would have remembered the guy who told me exactly what was going to happen. But it was 2 years later that Joseph had to stay in jail. And remember, this is all because his brothers were jealous of him. And they sold him into slavery, and now he's in jail. But then this happened. One day, Pharaoh had a dream. And Pharaoh had this dream that there were 7 big, fat cows on the side of the Nile. And they were there. Then all of a sudden, 7 skinny cows came up out of the Nile and ate the fat cows. He had another dream. And it was 7 really good-looking sheaths of grain that were growing. And then they withered and died, and they were replaced by 7 just scrawny-looking ones. And nobody could tell him what this dream meant. He knew it meant something. Well, then the cupbearer said to the Pharaoh, he said, Pharaoh, I know somebody who told me what my dream meant. Maybe he can tell you. And so the Pharaoh says, go get him. And they bring Joseph to the Pharaoh, and Joseph tells Pharaoh exactly what those dreams meant. He said, those 2 dreams mean the same thing. That here in Egypt, we're going to have 7 years of plenty, lots of food, lots of stuff, and then we're going to have 7 years of famine. No food, nothing. He said, and so you need to collect that 7 years of food and save it. That way you're ready for this famine. Well, Pharaoh was so impressed. He said, God must clearly be with you. So he took Joseph and said, you are in charge of everything in Egypt. I am the only person above you. You are in charge of everything. And so Joseph, over the next 7 years, collected the food, and he brought it together, and they had so much they quit counting in Egypt. Well, after those 7 years, the famine hit. And it wasn't just a famine in Egypt. It was all over. And people were running out of food, and they would come to Egypt and they would buy food. And Egypt got rich and powerful through this. Well, see, Joseph's brothers, who still lived north there, they ran out of food. And they needed some food. So Jacob, his dad, sent the 10 older brothers down to Egypt to get food. They go down to Egypt to buy some, and they run into Joseph. Now, they don't recognize Joseph at this point, but I can tell you what, Joseph recognized them. And he knew who they were, and so he sold them some food, but he talked to them first. And he realized that his dad was still alive, and he realized that they had another younger brother, Benjamin, which he knew all that, but he got them to tell him. And so he told them, he said, next time you come back, you need to bring your younger brother, Benjamin, with him. But what he did was he kept one of the brothers with him. So all the other brothers went back, they told their dad, and he said, I'm not sending Benjamin. I've already lost Joseph. I'm not losing Benjamin too, because Benjamin was now his favorite. Well, a little while went by, and they ran out of food. They didn't have a choice. They had to go back to Egypt to get more food because they were going to starve to death. And so they had to take Benjamin, or Joseph wouldn't have seen them, or they would have been killed. So they go down, and Joseph sees them, and he plays a little trick on them, actually. It's kind of funny. He gives them the grain, and he hides his silver cup in Benjamin's bag. And as they leave, he sends his guards after him, and he says, hey, one of you guys stole from us. And they're like, no, we didn't steal, we promise. They said, we'll look, and if it's in somebody's sack, that person will be killed, and the rest of you will be slaves. They said, go ahead and look, none of us stole anything. Well, they look through all the bags from the oldest to youngest. They get down to Benjamin's, and that's that cup. Well, you can imagine these brothers are scared. They don't know what's going to happen. They all come back to Egypt. And they all come back, and Joseph begins to talk to them. He says, why would you steal from me? Why would you do these things? Oh, we didn't steal. We promised. We didn't do any of that. And Joseph then, he reveals to his brothers who he is. He says, I am Joseph, the one that you sold into slavery. Now, if you're the brothers, my first thought would have been, uh-oh, what is getting ready to happen? He's got to be angry with us. But you see, Joseph forgave them. Joseph had forgiven them for what they did. Genesis 45 tells us this. It says, then Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. And when they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into slavery into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there's been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there'll be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. Here's what's so amazing about Joseph. All these terrible things happened to him, and he forgave. And he knew that God had a plan for his life, that God had put him in these situations for this time and for this moment to help his family and to take care of them. Joseph knew that God was in charge and that God would take care of him and that God would lead him. This is an amazing example of God taking care of his people. And here's what we can learn from Joseph. Even though we go through difficult times, we go through hardships and things around us that are tough, God has a plan, and he can use those moments in our life for his good. I want you to have our final discussion time, and this is what I want you to talk about as a family. What would you have done if you were Joseph when his brothers came to get food? Would you have forgiven them? Would you have punished them? What would you have done if you were Joseph? Would it be hard to forgive them? Would it be difficult for that to happen, for what all they had done to you? And how have you seen God take care of you in a tough time? How has God been with you in a difficult situation or time? And then here's a big one. Parents, I would love for you to discuss this one with your kids especially. What plans do you think God has for you in your life? Parents, this is a great opportunity to talk about the great attributes that your kid has and how God can use them for his glory. This is a great opportunity to point out their specific personalities and say, God can use that in this way. Because see, God has a plan. And just like with Joseph, we may not understand the plan today, and we may not understand exactly what is happening, but God is in charge, and God has a plan for our lives. And when we follow him, he will lead us and take care of us. We'll see you next week with our Family Time Learning.